distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to be with you here today in India, the cradle of an ancient spiritual civilization in the heart of Asia. I want to thank my good friend, Dr. Markandeya Rai, Chairman of GPF India, as well as our convening partners, the Indian Council for International Cooperation, Manav Radhav University, and the Yuvsata Youth for Peace for organizing this very important conference. So give them all a round of applause, please. I'm also pleased to acknowledge the many important Indian spiritual teachers as well as key leaders from around the Indo-Pacific region, including Indonesia, the Republic of Korea, Mongolia, and of course, Africa. Please give all of them a round of applause. Your participation is very meaningful, as this vast region will play a central role in determining the future direction of humanity and the prospects for peace and prosperity in this region. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is in chaos. The rise of woke politics is challenging the traditional Judeo-Christian values and the classic liberal views of the West and its institutions from within. There is an alarming cacophony of conflicting ideas about society and the human condition, from the nature of the state to individual identity and gender relations. The result has been widespread political and social instability, uncertainty, and most of all, moral confusion. The liberal ideals of Western democracies, rooted in individual freedoms and inalienable rights, are being undermined for the sake of a collective conformity with almost religious fervor. Although the end of the Cold War revealed the evils of socialism and communism, a new secular Marxist worldview is taking hold in the West, uprooting its values, norms, traditions, and institutions. This unfortunate reality is eroding the common ground upon which society can stand, as both progressive and traditional sides become more polarized, creating an untenable situation. This woke orthodoxy is not just content to undermine the traditional values upon which Western democracy stands, sowing discord from within. It seeks to export its ideas to other cultures, such as those in India, East Asia, and traditional African societies, and twist their values with their own distorted image. In the realm of geopolitics, we are witnessing the rise of assertive statist powers that are prepared to impose their will on their neighbors, reminiscent of the actions taken by totalitarian regimes of the last century that led to 2 world wars and the Cold War. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia was a shock to most in the West that had become complacent about Putin's ambition to restore the territorial influence of the former Soviet Union. Heading into the second year of war, there seems to be no end in sight. For the near term, as Ukraine seeks to regain its lost territories and Russia fortifies its positions. Here in Asia, China has made it clear that it is prepared to violate Taiwanese sovereignty even by force under its one China policy. That is why so many experts are concerned by the war in Ukraine, since many believe that Chinese authorities are studying the conflict and its implications for their invasion of Taiwan. The U.S. has preempted that concern by showing its commitment to the island's defense through a well-publicized visit of the former Speaker Nancy Pelosi last year, and the recent meeting with the current Speaker McCarthy and the Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen. The threat to Taiwan and China's intent on controlling the South China Sea, the world's most vibrant trade route, through the creation of a military island basis, has raised alarm among all of its neighbors in the Pacific. These provocative moves have led the U.S. and its allies to join in a new variety of organizations. The Quad Treaty of the U.S., Australia, India, and Japan, advanced by the late Minister Shinzo Abe, was considered the Asian NATO in response to the rising threat of China. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for the Prosperity of 2022 represented 14 regional nations with a combined economic output of 40% of the world's GDP as a counter to China's efforts to economically influence the region. These developments and President Xi's recent visit to Russia and the Middle East are beginning to solidify the emerging lines between the free world and the world under Chinese influence. Ladies and gentlemen, the tides of history are shifting from the Atlantic sphere to the Indo-Pacific. In this geopolitical environment, any nation that cherishes the ideals of fundamental freedom and human rights would clearly be wise to align with the U.S. and its democratic allies. For the threat that China poses is a rise of totalitarian statist regimes that challenges the ideals of liberty. It is important to note, although China has adopted some aspects of a market system, it never relinquished its one-party communist rule or the Maoist revolution. And it has never embraced democracy nor the ideals of liberty that form the foundation of the free world. Given this threat to liberty, the confusion being spread by the woke left in all Western democracies is even more alarming. At no time in human history should the West be clearer about its core values and whence its freedoms and rights derive. Many of the activists living in the West, however, take them for granted, failing to recognize the hard-won religious and philosophical milestones rooted in the Judeo-Christian ethic that gave birth to them. The formation of the United States of America in 1776, through its Declaration of Independence from the British Empire, planted the seeds of those ideals with its pregnant second sentence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The foundational premise in those immortal words is that human freedom and rights come from the transcendent power of God or our Creator, and not by any human authority or institution, and that they are unalienable. In our current global circumstance, there is an urgent need to clarify and uplift that time-honored universal spiritual principle. It is important that we understand which ideas will lead to a peaceful, harmonious future, and which will dissolve social bonds, leading to chaos and anarchy. What is important to note is that all democracies are not truly free, as was the case in ancient Greece and even the Roman Empire, nor are they immune from the tyranny of mob rule. Such principles that are spiritual provide the much needed compass to navigate through the rapidly changing norms and guide humanity towards God's original ideal, which I believe is rooted first and foremost in families centered on the original creative love of God. We do not need to look too far to find evidence of these universal principles. We can find them in the great faith traditions that have preserved, taught, and practiced those time-honored traditions that point to the innate value of human life and the proper order in human relationships, especially the family, as well as the virtues by which to live. Throughout history, God has inspired the founding of various faith and wisdom traditions to elevate human consciousness and cultivate ethical civilizations. It should be the people of faith who lead the world to peace. I believe the vision that can unite and inspire humanity to transcend all the walls that divide the human family is none other than one family under God. All faiths should cooperate and adopt this vision to build a world free of conflict, reflecting the highest spiritual ideals rooted in universal principles and values that reflect God's truth, righteousness, goodness, and the love for all of humanity. Only then will we be able to harness the power of faith to transform the world and build true everlasting peace and harmony for all. We can no longer be afforded to proclaim that we are just one family while continuing to live in our separate boxes. Ladies and gentlemen, my homeland of Korea and India share a very special relationship in history that will have very important implications for this century. There is a historic connection between our two countries that go back 2 millennia. I believe Dr. Rai already touched upon this, but let me continue. In the 1st century CE, an Indian princess known here, I believe, as Suriratna, sailed to Korea, married King Soro, and became the queen to us Koreans, known as Ho Hwangok. There are memorials to her in both our countries. That marriage alliance tied our ancient civilizations and made clear that there were significant connections between our two countries at that time and ever since. In the last century, the Korean Samil independence movement launched in 1919, while the Paris peace talks were underway right after World War I, influenced the Indian independence movement by introducing the platform of mass nonviolent protest rooted in universal spiritual truths. 2 million Koreans on the peninsula, 10% of the population at that time, engaged in peaceful protests over 2 months, making it the largest demonstrations of nonviolent resistance up until that time. It was in 1920 that Gandhi then formulated Satyagara, or truth force, that became the governing philosophy behind the Indian nonviolence movement. In 1929, Nobel Peace Laureate Rabindranath Tagore, a leading thought leader of Indian independence, met with Korean students in Japan and was deeply moved by the undying aspirations of the Korean people. He immortalized those aspirations in a famous quatrain called The Lamp in the East, describing Korea as one of the ancient sources of light in Asia, waiting to be relit for the illumination of the East. The main impetus for the independence movement in both Korea and India in the early 20th century relied on their own ancient spiritual traditions. In the case of Korea, it was motivated by Hongik-ingan that mandated the Korean people to live for the benefit of all of humanity. And for India, it was Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam that proclaimed that the world is one family. As a result, both movements were not simply driven by resentment towards a colonial power, Certainly, they both wanted to be free from foreign rule, but each had a greater vision of a peaceful, harmonious coexistence, even with their oppressors, as well as their neighbors after independence. That is what made those independence movements so great. Later, this approach became the inspiration for Martin Luther King Jr. and the American Civil Rights Movement. Dr. King applied the spiritual principle of nonviolence to prick the conscience of a nation. He looked to the American founding creed of equality to hold that nation to account for its moral failures in its treatment of the blacks in that nation. His historic I Have a Dream speech did not simply condemn the injustice, but called on all people to renew their commitment to those founding ideals, moving a nation. Similarly, in South Africa, Nelson Mandela adopted the principles of nonviolence rooted in universal truth while he was in the prison for attempting to violently overthrow the apartheid government. There in prison, he learned to forgive his oppressors and then later work with then President de Klerk shortly after his release in the 1990s to dismantle the very system of segregation rooted in the apartheid system. He became the first president of a multiracial South Africa in 1994 and played a central role in reconciliation between the races, being globally recognized for his work and statesmanship. Ladies and gentlemen, due to our two countries' important legacy in shaping the most significant movements for freedom, equality, and human rights of the 20th century, I believe that our destinies, those of Korea and India, are intertwined. We have an even greater role to play in this century as the world stands on the precipice of war and chaos. Our unique spiritual heritage and the history of nonviolence place us in a unique position to champion peace in the Indo-Pacific region, here in the southern heart of Asia and the Pan-Pacific Rim to the east, and eventually to the world. Now I want to share something else that our two nations have in common. Korea is a 5,000-year-old civilization. Yet through our entire history, we never invaded any of our neighbors. We were attacked and invaded over 900 times throughout the course of our history, yet we never attacked our neighbors. But always, because of the spiritual principles of Honginggan, we internalized that suffering to be able to love humanity because of the providential mandate in our founding to live for the benefit of all mankind. That is the power of spiritual principles. Our unique spiritual heritage. Let us never forget that, ladies and gentlemen. Before we can open a new chapter in the story of this region, we must bring a close to the last vestige of the 20th century's tragic legacy of colonialism and the Cold War geopolitics that remains on the Korean Peninsula. It is deeply ironic that the nation which initiated the paradigm of nonviolent mass protest rooted in universal truths remains divided to this day, unable to realize the aspirations of the Samil movement for independence more than a century ago. When other colonized people, as well as nations in the Soviet sphere of influence, were eventually able to achieve national sovereignty and unification. Thus, Korean reunification is of utmost importance in setting a new precedent for peace, not only on the peninsula, but in Asia and in the world. I have developed a new vision for unification called the Korean Dream. Unlike past efforts, it draws upon the ancient Korean philosophical ideal of 홍인간, which predates or precedes the current ideological division by millennia, to tackle the present challenges of today. It was the impetus behind the higher moral ideals of the independence movement and gave all Koreans a sense of providential purpose to create a model nation that could be the benefit to all mankind. It challenges the divided peninsula to discard the foreign construct of division and recognize its common identity and destiny. In order to do this, I plan on relaunching the paradigm of the Samil movement to bring about unification. To that end, I have created Action for Korea United, AKU, a coalition of civil society activists, organizations, NGOs, and associations that represents millions of South Koreans. To date, we have more than 1,000 partners united in the largest grassroots movement for unification in the history of the two Koreas. We plan to hold peace rallies in the South that will climax in 2025 with a massive event for unification, which will highlight the 80th anniversary of Korean independence from Japanese rule. Imagine, because dreamers are the ones who change the world. Imagine if tens of millions of Koreans on the peninsula and the diaspora, as well as supporters from around the world, gathered their collective voices to demand the peaceful reunification of the Korean peninsula. Surely, the metaphysical and physical wall that divides the peninsula will fall, and a new era will dawn for the Korean people, the Indo-Pacific region, and the world. I hope and trust that the spiritual and thought leaders here will recognize that moment and give your support to the Korean dream. Can you do that, yes or no? The rising prominence of India in this region is evidenced by its role in hosting the upcoming G20 meeting, drawing upon the rich heritage of Indian spirituality to create the theme, One Earth, One Family, One Future. It is also noteworthy that India is convening the C20 of civil society counterparts to the G20, giving substance to spiritual principles and values by promoting the essential value of service and the ethos of one family. This is highly significant because of clear recognition that politics, economics, and technology alone are inadequate to resolve the many challenges facing the world today. These challenges at its core arise from a clash of fundamental worldviews that can only be effectively addressed by drawing on a deep spiritual principle tradition and values rooted in universal truths. That is why what is happening here today is so important. We are all essentially connected in the one human family, and we are one family because of our shared origin in the one Creator God. Our innate, inherent value and the fundamental rights that we enjoy are endowed to us by that Creator and by that God. To encapsulate these truths in a way that all can easily grasp, I have long advocated a simple yet very profound vision statement, and that is one family under God. Today, young leaders, spiritual leaders, scholars, and others from civil societies across the Indo-Pacific region have taken ownership over this vision of one family under God. You have concluded important discussions on its implementation in areas related to youth, education, values-based peace building, and the environment. I look forward to the New Delhi Declaration you are issuing here today, and will outline specific initiatives that will give substance to the noble theme of the GPLC here today. Today, however, I'm announcing that the Global Peace Foundation and its partners will establish the Indo-Pacific Leadership Forum to further implement this movement, fostering one global family guided by traditions and values shared across all cultures that are gathered here. I have asked Dr. Markandeya Rai to organize and lead this initiative. Let's give him a round of applause. And I humbly invite all of you for your participation and for your efforts in that cause. The Leadership Forum will work in this region in a similar way to the Latin American presidential mission that I had founded. Through it, public-minded former presidents work for the benefit of Latin America through promoting peace, cooperation among countries, and spiritual and material development for their people. I hope that each one of you will become peace builders in your own right, in your own respective spheres, to influence and join with us, as well as influence others to join in this great movement for global peace. Let us all commit to become the moral and innovative leaders of tomorrow, who invest our passion, energy, and talent to serve the greatest good for the benefit of all humanity. That together, step by step, we can finally realize the greatest dream of all, the dream of one family under God. Thank you very much. May God bless you and your families.